What's up, everybody? Um, Back from a week-long hiatus in order to heal from a pretty wicked sunburn that I had. Um, Pro tip for everyone on sunscreen: make sure you apply it evenly. Uh, I did not, so I had my whole face was pretty much covered except for forehead up here, and had the nasty blistering, and I learned my lesson. Um, But anyway, so today we are going to be talking about step six. And step six being this, that I acknowledge that I can deliberately make bad decisions that come with bad consequences. Now, the reason why I included this into the steps, because people often ask me, well, what does that really have to do with dealing with an addiction? Um, Ultimately, this was a step meant to be for the people who have gone to treatment a lot, have been in and out of the process multiple times. There seems to be a theme that goes in the treatment world, and the theme tends to be this: that if you keep making the same bad decision over and over again, and you keep getting the same bad consequences for said decision, and you keep repeating it, then it must be for the reasons of a mental health disorder and not you anymore making that decision. Um, and I do take an issue with that because I believe that there are people, a lot of people, most people, um, who are well aware that their decisions are leading to bad results, but yet they continue to do it anyway. I don't think this always constitutes an issue of mental health. I think in a lot of ways it constitutes a diagnosis of self-discipline. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. At the end of the day, we can either deal with the pain of being self disciplined, or we can deal with the pain of regret. And I think that, this whole mental disorder thing comes into play when a lot of us are dealing with a lot of regret from these decisions that we have made. And, if you look at the actual definition of addiction, it's defined as this: that addiction is a chronic, relapsing brain disorder that's characterized by compulsive and involuntary drug seeking and using. And then they include this statement at the end, they include the statement that says, despite negative consequences. And it's been a while since I've been in an English class, but if I remember correctly, usually the end of the statement or the end of a sentence, typically when ended like that, or when a sentence or a phrase is structured like that definition was, um, the main point for why you said everything before is because of what you said at the end, despite the negative consequences. So I do take an issue with that, and it was actually at the root of the development of the disease model, was this idea that a lot of people couldn't make sense of addiction, and couldn't make sense of why people would constantly make the same kind of choice, the same kind of behavior with the consequences that come with it. It doesn't make sense to a lot of people, mainly people who have never done it before. Because if you've done it before, you might understand. Um, but I don't think that ultimately I have to run through the litany of other examples of behaviors that often lead to negative consequences, but yet are repeated over and over and over again. Um, the fact of the matter is that sometimes I like to speed. Um, I used to speed quite often when I had pretty fast vehicles. And I knew the potential dangers of that. I knew that with increased speed, you run the chance of, if you were to get into an accident, of it being much more damaging. As well as I knew if I was caught going perhaps 20 over, that could constitute reckless driving, which can come with a suspended license, massive fines, or potential jail time. Um, and so when I would do the speeding as often as I did back then, no one ever came up to me and suggested that, well, maybe you're doing this, Jake, because I don't know, you got lead foot disorder or something. Um, it'd be rather ridiculous if somebody suggested that, because the fact of the matter is, I knew that speeding could lead to results that I didn't want, but I did it anyway. And it led to some results sometimes that I didn't want. But either way, I mean, you can look at perhaps relationships even in this realm. A lot of people enter relationships over and over and over again that they know could potentially be bad, but yet they continue to do it despite the warnings. They continue to do it despite the red flags, if you will. And no one looks at them and necessarily says, wow, what a disordered individual you are. We'll often just take the most simple approach to it and, just say, what the heck are you doing? We gave you the warning signs. We gave you the advice and you didn't take it. And usually a lot of people will just detach from that and let the person feel the consequences for it. So when it comes to addiction, I think it's kind of a similar thing. And the reality is that I think when we attach disorder or we attach this notion of disease to this problem, I think it's ultimately rather arbitrary and more harmful, really, than anything else. I believe that all addicts are well aware that their behavior is leading or could lead to potential outcomes that they don't want. And if you ask most addicts, people who are in the midst of it, like, hey, what could happen? You will often hear them say exactly the things that could happen. I could go to jail, I could OD, I could get locked up, my relationships could get ruined, I could go financially bankrupt. And then it's interesting that when these things do happen to a lot of them, then we break in with, disease and disorder. Um, I just think, again, that ultimately that's rather arbitrary or pointless and more harmful than anything else. In my opinion, a lot of what motivates addiction is someone's desire to feel good or to simply feel better than they currently are. Or you could make the argument that it's for the sake of an escape of sorts. Um, and that, in my opinion, again, is what motivates a lot of addiction. It's a desire to feel good. It's a desire to feel better. Again, if you haven't done anything like that, I did heroin, and to anyone who has never done it, and you try to describe what the pull is of that, it's difficult for them to understand, but to me it makes perfect sense, and I'm pretty sure most people who've done heroin, it would make perfect sense to you how strong that desire can be and how deep that drive can go. Um, some people, however, they meet this desire to feel good by taking a walk, or maybe they'll play a musical instrument, maybe they take a drive perhaps, or listen to music, while others, again, meet this with a substance. Um, when you look at it, the only real um, reasonable difference between these people, or between substance use and all these other activities, is that substance use, it comes with its very own specific set of consequences. Nobody really runs the risk of going to jail by exercising. Nobody runs the risk of uh, going going to jail for the sake of taking a walk. Um, However, again, substance use comes with this very specific set of consequences that I would argue are rather can be exclusive to it. But at the end of the day, again, I don't think that this specific set of consequences and its destructive ability necessarily constitute labeling it as disease or disorder. Um, you could even argue that if substance use wasn't so consequential, and we actually, we see this, the individuals who we would call to be functioning addicts, most people look at that and say, well, maybe they don't have a problem. I mean, all you got to do is really watch an episode of Real Housewives or something, Beverly Hills, and you'll see a lot of them do stuff. So they say. And not a lot of them look at it as a big deal because their life is still together. Um, but anyway, you could argue again that if substance use wasn't so consequential, would we even feel the need to categorize this thing as a disease or treat it, for instance, as such? Because the reality is, if you remove the external consequences from addiction, then really you're left with someone who would have simply a bad, physically dependent habit and potentially legitimate and very measurable brain damage. It is true that substances change the brain, but what's also true is that the way that they change the brain isn't that much different than how the brain changes with the formation of habit. And that's why some people argue that addiction is more of a learned habit or learned behavior than it is any kind of mental disease. So, when you take someone who, let's just say, has a bad physically dependent habit, then ultimately this whole deal becomes very easy to solve, becomes very easy to fix. It's called get you sober. It's called work on the measurable brain damage or brain difference that may be going on. Again, and then you've by argument fixed the problem. Uh, it kind of goes to this idea that in addiction, the issue isn't getting people sober. The issue is keeping them that way. And I think that says a lot. We've got hundreds of ways that we can get people sober nowadays. It's really not a difficult thing. The only difficult thing is getting that person to want to be sober. That's the difficult part. And when we chalk up addiction to being all about disease and disorder, you create a mentality in these individuals that, simply wanting to do better is not enough. And I fundamentally disagree with that. I believe it is the one and only necessary thing in order to make this work is the idea that you have to want it. And like I said, if I produce ideas in you, such as, well, it's a disease and you got these disorders and your brain is screwed up, and in order to deal with this problem, you have to go through some kind of medical intervention, then yeah, you're gonna be left with someone who believes that, well, me just wanting to get over this problem and me wanting to move on with my life, you get them to a point of where they believe that means nothing. That it's not enough for them. It's not enough for them to be able to do something about this problem. And I think, again, that is completely wrong. One of the things that we should look at is how other countries typically treat this problem of addiction. I think we can learn a lot from them. Um, and I don't think it would necessarily surprise anyone that really here in America, this is the only place where we take the approach to addiction that it is both Well, that it's the substance use and it's mixed with mental health. We're the only place that puts those two together. Um, Again, mental health and substance use, or we're the only place that will say that your using is caused by an underlying issue, again, often a mental health issue of some kind. And how other countries typically look at this is more along the lines of addiction being a needs based problem. These people are using because they believe they need it in order to get by in life. They believe that it's the only thing that can give them any semblance of whether you want to call it peace of mind. They believe they need it in order to get through with their life that they have. And so when other countries again look at this problem and look at it from a needs based kind of standpoint, well, what does the treatment really consist of? Well, you can look at places like, for instance, Norway or Sweden, and the way they treat this problem is they take a very kind of harm reductionist approach. Harm reduction, if you don't know, is simply what can we do to reduce the potential harm here? Um, MAT is an example of that, medically assisted treatment, things like methadone or Suboxone. Another example could be, and this was when I first started working really professionally in this kind of thing. I remember asking one of my bosses one time, what do you do with somebody who simply doesn't want it? What do you do with someone who, again, they don't want to get clean, they don't want to get sober, they're more than happy to continue on with what they're doing. What's your advice to that kind of person? And they simply said, well, if that's their decision, then encourage them to find more legal ways to do it. Which I kind of chuckled at that, but in reality, that is a harm reduction kind of approach. To say, okay, well, obviously you're having legal trouble. Well, then maybe we find a more legal way for this to get done. Maybe you move to California or whatever, or Oregon or Colorado for that matter. Um, but either way, these other places, again, some of the examples of harm reduction that they do is, for instance, I think it's either Sweden or Norway, or it might be both. But their government produces their own forms of the substances, such as slow release morphine, for instance, or slow release heroin, even. And they dish this stuff out in clinics practically. Um, and you go to a clinic. It's kind of, again, if you're familiar, it's kind of like a methadone clinic here. What you would do with that, you'd go there once a day to get your dose. And that's how some of these countries approach this. They do slow release forms of these drugs, and the governments themselves um, synthesize these drugs for them. Um, but these countries do understand a basic kind of principle. They're not just giving these people the drugs and just saying, well, there you go, go out and do whatever. Um, they do understand this concept that when there are no other options present for an individual, other things that they believe they could do with their life, other things that are better, then they will most likely end up returning to substance use, or they will most likely continue in doing it. Um, Again, their treatment consists of trying to establish a person's basic needs. Like if they need housing, get them housing. If they need food, they help them get food. If they need a job, if they need um, money, they'll help them with financial assistance programs of sorts. basically the treatment consists of trying to establish the individual's basic needs. And what you find is that, as more often than not all the time, but more often than not, what you find is that as you start meeting, these individuals, their basic needs, as you start building a life for them outside of the substance use, then slowly but surely the substance use kind of just, it's almost like it just gets pushed out in a lot of cases. They start to realize that with this new life that they're building, that there's certain things that don't fit into it, substance use being one of them. And so most of these individuals kind of just naturally quit over an extended period of time. And whether these kinds of approaches work better, it can be up for debate. I've no disillusions that there aren't some bad sides to that kind of approach. But at the same time, we also have to really look introspectively at the approach that we're taking here, in this country, the mixture of substance use with the mental health. And it's like this, really. It's that as substance use services, treatment services for it, along with mental health services, have increasingly become available to people, we have also seen a steady rise, almost in conjunction with the rise in treatment that's available to them. We have also seen a steady rise in cases of mental health, as well as a steady rise in issues with addiction and substance use disorders. You really have to think about that. At this point in our history, we have the most treatment available for these problems, but we also have never had higher numbers than what we do right now of people who are dealing with these problems. The logic from people who have pushed for more and more treatment, the logic has always been this, that there's not enough treatment out there and we need to make treatment more available for these individuals. But again, as we've done that, we have seen, once again, just a steady rise in these kinds of cases with substance use and mental health issues. Logic would tell you that as treatment, has risen, as there is more availability of treatment, it'd be logical, in my mind at least, to assume that then we would see these numbers start to tick down. But again, the exact opposite has happened. And the problem really is that nobody really questions why this is the case. In the minds of a lot of treatment institutions, somebody who they can't help simply doesn't want it bad enough, or is in denial about their issue, when in reality it could very well be that these people simply don't want the brand of treatment that's being sold to them. And so I think that we really need to be looking at this introspectively, from a treatment standpoint. It's not, again, it's not that, people don't want to help themselves, in my opinion. I believe that every addict has a very real side to them that desperately doesn't want to do this stuff anymore. But maybe they're waiting, for the right thing to come along. And I think that with a lot of people, the way that treatment is set up, it is simply not the right thing for a lot of people. Maybe for 95% of individuals who step into a treatment center, it may not be right for that. I quote that number simply because that is the recidivism rate nationally for treatment when it comes to substance use and mental health issues. a 95% recidivism rate. 5% of people who go end up getting better. And again, it's not, in my mind, it's not that those 95% simply just don't want it. I think they do. I think what they really don't want is what treatment may be trying to turn them into, a diseased, a disordered, um, very fragile kind of individual, always at the risk of having a relapse. And somebody who now has to structure their whole entire life around this idea that they had a problem with substances. I don't know who would want to do that. I didn't want to do that when I first got into this whole thing. So, back to the original point, though, about the bad consequences leading, or bad decisions, rather, leading to bad consequences, and how that doesn't always constitute a diagnosis of disease or disorder. Um, the way I often say it is, I today have just as much ability as anybody else to return to heroin, for instance. Um, and likewise, I still have the ability to be very dumb with my decisions. And the only thing that's going to fix that is me recognizing the mistakes. It's me recognizing that, okay, what I did was dumb. The way I've been acting is by definition rather stupid and careless. And, uh, and I need to be able to fix that. I need to fix that. I don't believe that you could get to that point again if you believe that your actions are the result of a disease or a disorder that you can't do anything about unless you get some kind of medical intervention. And so, in my opinion, I think we should kind of move away from this idea that we are diseased individuals on the addict side. I am of the thinking that the only thing, if you've been clean for, let's say, 20 some odd years, the only thing that makes you still an addict is this kind of thinking. And I'm pointing at my laptop right now. I got it open. Usually outside. Usually I could do this by memory, but I don't know if you can tell. I'm kind of tired right now. But anyway, so again, I think we need to move away from this kind of idea that we are diseased individuals. That's what this step is about. It's simply about just trying to get you to see that, again, we have the capacity to be really good individuals, very smart with our decision making. But we also have the capacity to be very dumb with our decision making. And just because we're making dumb decisions doesn't necessarily mean it's something, that there's some kind of imbalance going on up here. It's simply, I believe that if that's the case, then what we need to check is not our brains, but our motivations. We need to check our reasons for why we're doing what we're doing. And one of the arguments that I will make to kind of show you that this is not the result of some kind of disease or disorder, it would be asking this question. If you're actively using, then what is your justification for it? And if you have a justification for it, then that tells me, okay, you've thought about it then. That tells me that you know that this is wrong, and so you need to justify it. I believe that every addict has a justification for why they do what they do. And I think in a lot of ways, the answer to what is wrong with us essentially lies in that justification. Because that justification can be a very simple thing for some people, maybe it's, well, I just want to get high. Maybe it's fun. Maybe it's, well, all my friends are doing it. For some people, it's for the simple, it's the simple reason of trying to avoid withdrawals. And if withdrawal wasn't an issue, I think a lot of us probably would have given this up quite a bit sooner. But that's my opinion. Um, but either way, answer that question. What was your justification? And if you have one, then I think that kind of defeats the notion that this is any kind of disease for you. It certainly doesn't seem like then that you're dealing with something that's chronic. That's a brain disorder, and it's characterized by compulsive and involuntary drug seeking and using. Um, it sounds like you got a reason for it. And I think this is what treatment often misses. Or at least they may look at the reason and say, well, that's not the major issue. I just happen to believe, and this may be common sense, that the reason why you do this stuff, um, the reason you came up with in your mind, tends to be more important than any kind of disease talk or disorder talk or whether there's a chemical imbalance in there. Uh, because the reasons for why we do something are always the most important motivators. They just are. And so when we're looking at, okay, how do I address this then you need to check your reasons. You need to check that talk, that self-talk that you do, that tells you keep doing this. This is the reason why you should. Um, so that's pretty much what I got for you today. Uh, if you want a little bit more, check out the material. I keep it on Facebook page, Not Addicted, it's called. You'll know it's me. I tend to go with a theme, and that theme persists pretty much in every area of my life. So, other than my house is not black and white, but everything else is. So, yeah, again, that's all I got. I hope y'all are having a good time, having a good day. If you're not, well, there's hope out there. And maybe for some of you, this is it. Maybe this is the hope you've been looking for. Start making sense of what's going on with you. If you feel like you're just lost in this whole thing, and give it a look. Not Addicted. Give it a look. It may be just the thing to help you make sense of what's going on with you, and you'll see that you're not as screwed up as you've been led to believe. We'll see you soon.